Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM-LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcast and podcast emanating out of occupied Tsalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices from struggles for liberation from all around the world. Welcome. On January 15th, 2021, two men received a knock on the door of their Tallahassee apartment from someone claiming to be delivering a Postmate parcel. The two hadn't ordered anything, and that raised suspicion that someone was trying to break in and rob their home. So they said they didn't order anything and refused to open the door. Moments later, the door crashed open with a percussive grenade ignited by the FBI as they swarmed in with guns drawn and yelling. This was the arrest of U.S. military veteran, YPG volunteer medic, and instructor of yoga and jiu-jitsu Daniel Baker on charges of inciting violence at Florida's state capitol. This may sound like a familiar story of government arrests across the country since the January 6th far-right riot to stop the counting of ballots that Trump supporters and avowed white nationalists engaged in. The difference lies in the fact that Dan Baker wasn't calling for the storming of anything. The FBI alleged during this case that he made posts online calling for people to resist an attempted coup that elements of the far right had been promoting since the failed acts of January 6th in D.C., where armed putschists would take state capitals and public officials hostage. So why was the FBI targeting Mr. Baker? Why was he not allowed private meetings with lawyers during his time of detention prior to his conviction? Why was he kept in solitary confinement during his pretrial period at the Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee? On October 12, 2021, Dan Baker was sentenced to 44 months in federal prison for, quote, interstate communication of threats, unquote, for his Facebook posts and his militant anti-fascism, including his time fighting Daesh, or ISIS, in Rojava. His defense crew is appealing the ruling, but otherwise he's expected to be released at the soonest in March of 2024. For the next hour, we'll be sharing our March 7, 2021 interview with Jack and Eric. Both are anti-racist activists, students of Daniel's yoga and jiu-jitsu instruction, and Eric was the roommate that was present at the time of the home invasion by the FBI. You can find links to articles about the case in the show notes at our website and in this podcast, and more information on Daniel's case is on the Instagram account. You can find links to articles about the case in the show notes at our website and in this podcast, and more information about Daniel's case is to be found at the Instagram account Free Dan Baker, formerly the Guerrilla Gallery, so make sure to look for Free Dan Baker instead. You can contact support at danbakerdonations@gmail.com. You can donate to his support on PayPal with that same email, and you can find his Amazon wish list in the Instagram account. You can find a transcription of this interview alongside many others at our website at the time of this release. And at the time of this publication, December 2021, you can write Dan Baker at the following address: Daniel Allen Baker, number 25765-509, FCI Memphis, Federal Correctional Institution, P.O. Box 34550, Memphis, Tennessee 38184. And for a good synopsis of the case, plus some updates, you can check out an article entitled "A Florida Anarchist Will Spend Years in Prison for Online Posts Prompted by the Jan 6 Riot." This is by Natasha Leonard and can be found at The Intercept. Would you all please introduce yourselves with whatever names, pronouns, or affiliations that make sense for this chat?
So yeah, my name's Eric, he, him. I'm a visual artist, and I was Dan's roommate at the time of his arrest. We had traveled together for a while.
My name is Jack. I use they, them pronouns. I am studying biomathematics and computational science, and I'm an activist in the Tallahassee community. Activist and an organizer.
And are y'all on the support crew for Daniel?
I'd say we're probably like the two main folks on the support crew. We were all training jiu-jitsu together at the time of Dan's arrest. Jiu-jitsu and yoga.
Yeah, we just kind of started a workout group thing that they're trying to criminalize him for. They kidnapped our yoga teacher.
But they really...
Well, so would y'all give listeners a thumbnail sketch of who Daniel is and kind of your relationships, or like how you know him?
We kind of crossed paths a few times over the years. I think the first time we actually met was, I think it was like around like 2013. I think we had crossed paths in Krishna Temple in Chicago while I was traveling around. He had just come from a rainbow gathering, and he was traveling, visiting some different temples on the way back to the East Coast. And we'd only met for a couple days, and then we had reconnected on Facebook years later after he had returned from Syria. And I didn't even recognize him at first, but I reached out to him because I wanted to learn more about his experience. I had already been studying some kind of like related like poli-sci type stuff, and I wanted to try to get more insight into what, his experience was like. And he had also had like some training that, would be very valuable for all the different protests that were going on. So every once in a while I'd kick down and, send like a donation here and there when I could to kind of keep him going. And then eventually we just decided to take a road trip. I guess we had connected online maybe a couple years ago, maybe like late 2018, early 2019. We had known each other for about a year just online. We had traveled together, and we had just been in Tallahassee for maybe 5 or 6 months when he was arrested. He had some roots in the community here, and we were trying to meet, make friends and network with local activist circles and just try to participate in the best way we could. Dan had gone through the combat lifesaver training with the Army and had applied it during his time in Syria. So he was very valuable as a street medic. I mean, I've just been traveling around painting on and off full time for years. So we both kind of would just sort of fly signs sometimes and like do kind of like a pop-up exhibition. Like I would just kind of live paint. We saved up to get a room. We were just camping for a while. So like, we got off the street and got a small, apartment, and were able to save up and put him through an EMR course. He already knew all the material pretty much, but he just needed the certification to be able to work in that field. So we were just like on the way to getting him reestablished here, and then yeah, it's just like dudes kicked our door in through a. Well,
first they said they were the Postmates delivery service.
Yeah.
The what delivery service?
Postmates delivery service.
Oh.
Yeah, the FBI knocked on the door and then said Postmates delivery, and then Dan was like, we didn't order Postmates, and then shut the door. And then they kicked down the door, threw in a flashbang, and then said FBI. You have like Dan and Eric, sharing it separately. They couldn't. Dan hasn't had a very difficult time being able to communicate with anyone. But I think that the FBI wasn't expecting the blind landlady who's 80 years old and was in the room next door to corroborate the story. And so once that came out, she was in the room next door and heard them also announce themselves as the Postmates delivery and was able to independently verify that this happened. And they haven't, responded to that. They just didn't even deny it when it came up in the public hearing. But, the FBI agent went first and then said, we announced ourselves, and then they resisted arrest. And then Eric goes up and is like, they didn't announce themselves. They said they were the Postmates delivery service. And then they, it's just, if you get a knock on the door and it's a delivery and you didn't deliver something, I don't think anybody wants to answer that door. And I think everybody thinks that they might, if somebody's persistent, that they might be getting robbed.
Mm-hmm. Jack had been coming to a, like I said, we were trying to start sort of a workout group. We had been traveling, and I was trying to pick up some first aid stuff from him. He had also done some training in jiu-jitsu. He was like, he had competed a decent amount. He had some gold medals. I think he was about like purple belt level. He was like sort of upper intermediate, and he was just kind of helping me kind of pick up some of the basics. And we were going through the Ashtanga Yoga primary series for the yoga teacher training, and he had like the first certification in that, so it was kind of like he was sort of working on building up like his second certifications, and I was kind of going through getting my first. And so we started trying to invite some other people out and get some more folks involved, because I would never be able to afford learning all that kind of stuff without somebody who's giving that sort of access. So I just really wanted to help him make that available to the community here. Jack was one of the first people who was coming regularly to the groups we were doing, and I guess it was sort of helping them move past some recent difficulties.
When I started training jiu-jitsu and yoga, I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship, and training with Dan and Eric was actually a really healing practice for me. Dan and Eric created a safe space, which sometimes, like, as a non-binary person can be really difficult, especially with like cisgendered white males, but they were both just like really compassionate, really understanding, and like Dan and Eric are both really strong feminists, and I just really appreciated how comfortable they made me and how supportive they were while I was going through this process. So that was just really fundamental for me to move past this relationship and the pain that I had gone through. And so I feel like I owe Dan so much, because he was just somebody who is very understanding.
There's a few things that I'm noting in addition to the descriptions of you both talking about how Dan's been someone who works to create space, who works to build skills in order to share them. Like, those sound like some pretty fundamental parts of who he is as a person. People will join the military for a lot of different reasons, in part like maybe because they want to further a career, get out of a bad situation, maybe some more nefarious perspectives that people can have sometimes joining the military. But to train up to be effectively like a combat medic, or like a medic in what could be deadly situations, is a great skill set. And then going on to continue to apply that by volunteering to participate in the struggle against ISIS is another like show that someone is like applying this life-saving tool. And the fact that Dan was bringing it back and bringing it into these dangerous protest situations that the far right and the police create more and more so every, as time goes on in the US, that seems to say a lot about Dan's character.
Yeah, I think at least, from what I understand, whenever people come back from Rojava, often they're sort of briefed at the airport, and, a lot of times they're just discouraged from getting involved in politics or activism or anything like that. But, Dan was just he's very committed to his beliefs and to, social justice, and he, is kind of one of those rare individuals who, like, is willing to, go to prison or like put himself in harm's way for the sake of protecting others. And I think that's kind of something, that's like a fundamental part of his character.
And so you all were finding some stability at the time when this raid happened. I mean, being housing unstable is not, sadly, it's not a unique situation these days, but like, especially during the pandemic, is a very difficult time. And that must have been very emotionally like impactful and like just frightening to have somebody bust through the door and throw a flashbang and suddenly hear FBI with guns drawn out of nowhere. That's a traumatic experience.
Yeah, it was like the last way I was sort of expecting this trip to turn out. Although we kind of had a feeling something like this could happen, because we had also been previously stopped by FBI in Seattle during the time we were there. They had just rolled up to us in a parking lot after this one shooting had happened to question us about things that they had seen online. Basically, like, he just told them that he had already made his public commentary on Twitter, and that was like basically all he had to say about it. So they just kind of let us continue on. And as far as I know, they've been observing him as long as I can remember. Like, he was saying, I think he got back in like 2018. So like, I think he said they've been pretty much observing him and stopped. I've seen him post about being stopped a few times already. So it seems like he's kind of been under regular surveillance for a long time.
And y'all were up in Seattle he was doing medic work around the autonomous zone period, right? Where there were a few shootings, I know. So it seems to make sense that he would be around when there's some sort of violence showing up, like running towards the trouble in order to mitigate the harm that's been caused, to help save life. Yeah,
like I had been stranded out of state when COVID happened and the quarantine started. I was like homeless at the time. I was staying in a shelter, and I just ended up getting some seasonal work, and then got the stimulus. So I was like sold some paintings also. So I was able to get this car, and we had both been following the Unicorn Riot, and we were both just talking about how like, damn, like, wish we could be there and and support. And once we got the ability to do so, it was just kind of made sense to just take a trip.
What were the reasons that the FBI immediately gave for the arrest, if they gave any, and what has the federal prosecution since, like the U.S. attorney or whoever it is that's conducting a prosecution, what arguments are they giving as to why they thought it was necessary to bust into y'all's apartment and arrest him?
I mean, I'm not even really sure about the justification for that necessarily, for breaking in, but I mean, the justification they're using for the entire case is just them seeing some Facebook post and some flyer going around. Apparently, he was indicted on 2 separate charges, but his public defender is saying that they generally only rule it as one charge, if even that. So, hopefully it won't be as bad as, the maximum sentence.
This is The Final Straw, and you're listening to our March 7th, 2021 interview with supporters of imprisoned anarchist and anti-fascist veteran Dan Baker, who is now serving 44 months in federal prison. More details in our show notes. So the posts that appear to be the main source of the FBI's argument were related to after January 6th, after the right-wing riot that occurred at the National Capitol in D.C., the far right was claiming that it was calling for people to have similar actions, taking over space, damaging property, threatening people at state capitals around the country. Is it correct to say that the posts that you're talking about are ones saying we as community members need to show up and resist the violence of the far right and what violence they might bring into our communities while they're doing that? Was that the nature of the posts on social media?
Yeah, I mean, allegedly, it was, basically like a reaction to the situation. It's not like he was sort of taking some initiative to instigate or harass anybody or anything. It was just kind of like due to these pressing events and these threats coming up. I mean, which, a lot of us had been expecting for a long time, at least on some level, like, we're sort of anticipating that we might not see like a very peaceful transition of power. And especially like after what we had seen in DC, I feel like it was reasonable to assume that something similar could happen at the state capitol as well. Especially like, the FBI themselves were circulating warnings about what could happen.
I think there's like a fundamental difference between somebody going to another place, going to like DC, for instance, to protest or to counter-protest, as opposed to saying, hey, there's a very strong danger that militia or some other group are going to be, or Proud Boys or whatever, are going to be coming to our hometown and bringing some of the same violence that you're seeing in this other place. And just to sort of go back, like if Daniel's the kind of person who will run towards danger because he has built the skills and because he's courageous enough to put himself on the line in order to act as a line of defense, as well as to again, help people who are in harm's way. It seems a little illogical that the FBI is making a point of attempting to prosecute this individual who is trying to mitigate harm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the instinct is, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and maybe it's just a mistake or something. But I mean, I guess by now it's just there's so many of these cases, just by reading history, even that.
It's just with the most recent, news about what just happened with like Malcolm X, and now it's coming to light that the FBI were involved in that, and I think it's all very interesting with like. Judas and the Black Messiah just came out. Like, there's just so much more, discussion about the FBI's involvement in these assassinations of, Black leftist leaders in the 60s. And so I don't necessarily hold the FBI in the highest faith. But then even just the whole thing where they pretended they were the Postmates delivery, it's just like, what is the rationale for that? Like, what did they gain by pretending they were the Postmates delivery service? One of the criminal complaints against Dan was that he said he was getting funded from George Soros, that he had an Antifa card from George Soros, and then they used that to try to prove that he's like this international quote-unquote terrorist. And then during the public hearing, the public defender asked the FBI agent, do you know who George Soros is? And the FBI agent said, no. And then I laughed really hard when he said that. Like, I was just like, what the fuck? And I was even told to, like, not laugh. And then the public defender said, do you really think Dan was getting funded by George Soros? And then the FBI agent said, well, since I don't know who that is, I'm not sure. And it was just like, either he's really stupid and doesn't know who George Soros is, or he is really bad at his job and doesn't know who George Soros is, and isn't aware of the QAnon conspiracy that right-wing extremists ascribe to, or he was lying and playing dumb. And so it's just like, either of these options are not good for why he doesn't know who George Soros is. It's like saying, I don't know who Bill Gates is.
Yeah, and it's been coming out more and more, especially in the last few years, but this year in particular with Blue Leaks, the amount of information that's being pumped into the intelligence infrastructure of the U.S. from these fusion centers that pull in a lot of conspiracy theories, whether it be about Antifa lighting fires in the Pacific Northwest or just similar things to that the FBI agents didn't even necessarily need to know who George Soros is, although it does say a lot about their disconnection from popular culture and conspiracy theories. But yeah, it's not surprising if there was a pumping in of far-right conspiracy thinking and disinformation to the local FBI chapter, and then they decided to act out of that. And it's particularly, like, as you say, there's like a history of the FBI attacking anti-racist movements, particularly focusing on Black and brown activists, but also disrupting and incarcerating tons of activists who act in solidarity with, like, against white supremacy and against anti-Blackness.
Yeah.
And this administration has made a point of, I guess it was during the last administration anyway, but they had the whole both sides statement about the events in Charlottesville on August 12th of 2017. And I think that, especially after they had conducted extrajudicial killings of anti-fascist activists, they, if they were going to be going after and arresting people on the far right who had participated in January 6th, they probably had to pick up some people who would have been quote unquote opposition to show that they're not some sort of deep state leftist Campbell soup whatever conspiracy group.
Yeah, it was Democracy Now! Had a really good interview with Benjamin Crump, and then they were talking about, the new information that's come up with Malcolm X, and, he was saying that they're now calling Black Lives Matter protesters Black identity extremists. Have you heard about that? Like, that new terminology that's being thrown around for, like, arresting Black Lives Matter protesters?
Yeah, they've been introducing that more and more since the Ferguson uprising. They've sort of like shifted also it makes sense for this not to come up in that conversation that Benjamin Crump was engaging, but they've also been using the term anti-government extremists to be able to lump in anarchist anti-fascists, Black liberation activists alongside of white nationalists and Nazis. As opposed to focusing on white supremacists, they say, oh, well, the problem is not about the specific ideology. It's about extremism that's extra-parliamentary, where they're going to go and do actions in the streets or attack people or whatever. We're in a post-racial society, so we can say that, well, these people are extremists, but they're white about whiteness, and these people are extremists, but they're about blackness, as opposed to the centrist ideology that the U.S. government is supposed to uphold. So yeah, Black identity extremists being put on members of the Huey P. Newton Gun Club or the Not Fucking Around crew, I think it's called, or the Black Women's Defense League as like armed groups on the that are for Black liberation. Whether I disagree with the politics of at least one of them does, but. They have some sketchy views, I think, in terms of anti-Semitism. But yeah, I mean, that's still this sort of flattening of any sort of opposition as being a threat to the Democrat and Republican parties, basically. Sorry, that was ranty. I didn't mean to.
No.
If they can just pile up a whole bunch of Facebook posts and make a case out of that, that's bad news for everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of the things in the FBI complaint literally made no sense, where they had in the criminal complaint that Dan had posted YouTube videos showing basic first aid. And we were just like, why is this in the criminal complaint? Like, this is not illegal. This is not harmful. Like, this is literally Dan trying to educate people on how to help each other, how to literally heal each other. So that was bizarre. But then there were other things too, like in the public hearing, they were trying to prove, quote unquote, that Dan was a flight risk. And they pulled up Eric's Facebook and found a status where he said, things aren't looking great in the country, really want to get the fuck out. And that back in August. And then they were like, they have plans. And then our public defender was like, you know, when Reagan was president, I said I wanted to get out of this country. It just, but, you know, to pull up a post from months ago, you know, like 4 months ago, and then have somebody that says like, I want a GTFO from this country, and then say that's proof of plans of a flight risk is just, you know, it just, you know, the amount of people who said they wanted to go to Canada, like now they're all flight risks. It's just, you know, it's just really grasping at straws at that point.
Yeah, I was going to try to make some joke about how far of a stretch that was in yoga, but I couldn't.
Well, it was still appreciated either way. But it's yeah, so there's just there's so much about it. And you know, and while we're aware that Dan is a white, you know, male, so he is somebody who is, you know, wants to defend Black lives, and he essentially wants to use his privilege to defend Black lives. Like, he's, you know, again, the type of person to run towards the sound of gunshots. He is the type of person who wants to use his white privilege to protect Black and brown lives from white supremacists. I want to say that just because I know we've been drawing a lot of parallels between, you know, the Black Panther movement and Huey P. Newton, and just, you know, a lot of the examples that we've been giving with the FBI involvement has been with Black leaders, Black civil rights leaders, and so we're not trying to say that Dan is the, you know, obviously Dan is not Black and is still very nuanced and different, but I think that the criminalization of leftist ideology in general is still a common thread for all of these movements.
One of the things that terrifies them the most is these types of Rainbow Coalition style initiatives that sort of grasp the attention of people from a vast spectrum of backgrounds.
Yeah.
Currently, Dan Baker is sitting in a federal prison in Tallahassee. Have you been in contact with him? How are his conditions? How are his spirits?
I got a couple phone calls. I got a call last couple weeks. And then maybe 2-3 days ago, I just got a whole bunch of letters that I think had been sort of delayed in transit. But it's like probably over a dozen letters. Some of them are things that he wanted to share about his condition in there and the way he's holding up.
Yeah, I actually I stepped out to check the mail really fast while you guys were talking, but I realized that I had, you know, bought Dan a bunch of greeting cards to give him some color in his cell. And then I see that effective August 15th, all incoming general correspondence envelopes, including greeting cards, must be white in color only. So now I'm realizing that none of my letters have actually gotten to him. And so it's been very, very difficult to actually communicate with him. He wasn't able to make a phone call for weeks. Like, for weeks, he wasn't able to make a phone call. And when his lawyers asked the warden about it, the warden said, you know, talk to the prosecution. And then when they talked to the prosecutors about it, they were like, oh, no, you got to talk to the warden. So they were giving the public defenders the runaround. So you know, we didn't hear from Dan for several weeks. It was very stressful. Now, you know, realizing that the color of the envelope, the thing that makes no sense about it is they scan all of the letters in the first place and then send them copies of scanned letters. So I have no idea why the envelope would matter at all, because they don't even send them the envelope in the first place. So it's just, I don't know. But anyway.
Yeah, there's a couple complaints that he sent. You know, they're just like inmate requests to staff. He's just kind of trying to get access to his funds and, being able to communicate with everybody. Basically, he's just trying to request information of how he can access those things. And like, it took him a long time. Looks like, maybe another few days at least before he even like figured out how to be able to access the funds that he had available. He was like trying to get phone calls. He couldn't even really get phone calls with his lawyers. A lot of times they had him on 3-man hold. I think it's the like FDOE regulation. But, so they'll have like 3 people hold him on a chain with a lieutenant there every time he has a phone call or every time he meets with his attorneys.
He hasn't been able to have a private conversation with his attorneys, and he's been in jail for a month and a half, or he's been in the detention center for a month and a half, and he hasn't been able to have one private conversation.
Because there's always simultaneously these other prisoners that are being...
There's these 3 armed guards with him at all times, and they're trying to present him as if he's this, evil criminal.
Antifa super soldier.
Yeah, Antifa super soldier, evil criminal mastermind. But he, like Eric said, he's won, 6 gold medals, but, that's training within his level and his division. He's not, he's a purple belt training against other purple belts in his weight class, not, somebody who's like a black belt training against all these other black belts. I mean, he is very, very skilled, and don't get me wrong, but he's not a ninja. Like, I just don't know what they're... Are
they afraid he's going to attack his lawyer? They put him into a room with his lawyer. What's the possible danger except for extracting him from the room afterwards?
The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Join us for Kite Line, a weekly radio program on Channel Zero network that focuses on issues in the prison system. With over 50 episodes already released, you can hear informative and riveting stories about the impact of prisons on people both inside and outside of the prison walls, and how they fight back.
Kite Line is intended as means of communication between people across prison walls. Our goal at Kite Line is to amplify the voices of those within the prison system while encouraging dialogue with those on the outside.
Hear us on the Channel Zero network and visit our website for more information or previous episodes at kitelineradio.noblogs.org.
This is The Final Straw, and you're listening to our March 7th, 2021 interview with supporters of imprisoned anarchist and anti-fascist veteran Dan Baker, who is now serving 44 months in federal prison. More details in our show notes.
And a quick content warning, the next section has a reference to sexual assault. So if you're concerned, I would skip ahead about 2 minutes.
I think they just really don't want him to be able to have a private conversation with his lawyer. Like, there's been so many sketchy things about this whole thing. Like, the fact that he wasn't able to make a phone call mysteriously.
Yeah, we had been trying to make phone calls for like maybe, 2 weeks or so before anyone was able to get through. And, we even got in contact with his counselor, and, he just like hung up on us. Like, we had to pay subscriptions, even just to like register a phone number in the system. And even then, just like, basically like I think they initially put him in solitary. I mean, they were saying it was for like a quarantine measure, like 14 days of solitary confinement. But then others were saying it was because they thought he was going to like start an uprising or something. So, but then also I think after he had spent some time in there also, he was saying it would be preferable to go out into the general population because he was just concerned for his own safety. So
yeah, one of the things that he wrote in his letter is that somebody was raped with like a broomstick handle, and it's just, when you think about like, the conditions of jail, prison, or anything, it's just like it's a place that breeds hostility environment, and the guards encourage it. That was in one of his recent letters. Is there is a person who is struggling with some kind of mental issue, and the guards are saying that he's faking it and encouraging the other prisoners to bully him and antagonize him and hurt him. And, Dan is not sure what to make of it, except that he realizes that somebody is being bullied and intimidated and harassed, and and that the guards are encouraging, this behavior amongst the inmates.
I just got a couple of these letters from him over the last couple of days. Like the most recent ones were marked urgent because he was concerned because he was rotating his cell, and apparently when he got into the new cell, it was like covered in feces, and there was like blood in the sink, and someone had like used a toothbrush in there or something, and like so he was like, he wasn't sure if somebody was like going after him or like trying to intimidate him or like what the situation was, but it was like extremely unsanitary. He's not given access to any kind of even like antibacterial soap or anything like that. Apparently it was another inmate who is suffering from some kind of mental illness, and so apparently he's done this also in other cells, so it doesn't seem like anyone is targeting him specifically. I think he has gotten threats from other people that he's mentioned, but I was just discussing this with his attorney the other day. Some of these things are probably pretty common in a lot of these institutions. It's hard to even tell like exactly like what action to take short of just like abolishing them.
So can you tell me about the support crew a little bit? Like how you mentioned like you two are some of the most active people in it. What sort of infrastructure have you been building, or how's it been trying to talk about the case? Like there's been a few pretty good articles that I've seen online, and Jack, you mentioned writing a bunch of op-eds. How's that work going?
Yeah, so I think the way that it started is some of our Black community activists, Black leaders, actually reached out to us about trying to, support Dan. And, they recognized what Dan was trying to do and appreciated that he was trying to fight against white supremacy. Then we kind of grew it to include some more of the different prison solidarity groups across the state, across the nation, actually. We have some people from Philadelphia, we have people from New York, we have people in Indiana, and then we also have people who are kind of with the Rojava Solidarity Network. They just kind of all reached out, and, we were really grateful to, have this solidarity. And, we just sort of talk about, different news articles that come out. I appreciate everyone's perspective. Like I said, it's been, really helpful to have our Black activists, kind of give, feedback, because this is something we want to be very mindful of.
It's always been important this whole trip to defer to Black leadership.
Yeah,
and
like
local leadership.
Yeah, Black leadership and local leadership, especially since we're talking about like protecting Black and brown lives. We wanted the perspective of Black and brown leaders in the community.
I know that during a past interview with Coffee with Comrades, Eric, you had talked about using your existing artwork as sort of a platform to talk about Daniel's case. Is that still ongoing?
Yeah, so basically Dan and I had started this, that project, where we would live paint just kind of like in public spaces. And so we started a page called Guerrilla Gallery. And it's just kind of like a common thing that a lot of artists do, it's just kind of like a pop-up exhibition. But so I just kind of revived that page because I hadn't really had it running before, so I just decided to dedicate it as sort of like an info hub for his case and to use for future prison solidarity projects. So yeah, anyone is welcome to check that out if you want to keep up with it. It's on Instagram. So I've been, I try to post the relevant addresses, mailing addresses, and some of the guidelines for sending mail, any kind of relevant articles. Like I'll probably post this article in there once it comes up, and it's just kind of like sort of a place where I can, at least until we get a website going, we've kind of just been using that. We do have a website in the works, but we got shut down by GoFundMe pretty early on, so we've been working with some other groups to set up like an independent fundraiser. So hopefully that'll be online shortly. At that one hearing scheduled for, I think it was last Monday, it was supposed to be a state case, a hearing for an arraignment for whether he gets to keep his firearms. But instead, they took him before a grand jury and tried him with, I think it was just the prosecutor there. And so they ended up getting him with 2 charges instead of just the original one, even though the public defender doesn't think it'll stick. But his state case is still coming up as to whether he gets to keep his firearms. So I was just able to hire a lawyer just the other day to assist with that case and represent him, because I feel like that's important if they're also trying to take firearms away from people that they're harassing in this way.
Yeah, particularly people that haven't been convicted of a crime. Like I thought one thing about Florida is that Florida is the cousin to the rest of the U.S. South, where they'll like give you guns or like shove them into your hand when you're an infant. Like that's not fair and not true. But it's just difficult to consider the idea that the state of Florida is looking to deny someone the right to bear arms when they have served the country, quote unquote, and also when they haven't been charged with actually conducting any violent criminal act, let alone when conducting a criminal act in which a gun is a part of that.
The whole thing is bizarre. But the fact, exactly like what you're saying, that he hasn't actually been convicted of anything and they're already trying to make this decision.
Well, and this is also, I'm hoping that if we can do some kind of art exhibition pretty soon to draw attention to this, it'll kind of like also show up some of the systemic issues of how these types of laws can be used to take away people's voting rights, their ability to protect themselves. There's just like so much sort of wrapped up in it.
Well, and then also the absurdity of having social media posts be criminalized that were obviously jokes. Oh, another one of the things in the criminal complaint was that Dan had pictures or posts about eating the rich, and are just like, these are like fucking memes. Like, this is, absurd that they're including eat the rich memes as part of a case against him to say that he's a threat to society.
I'm just looking at the statement, the press release from the Northern District of Florida U.S. Attorney's Office right now. And it's saying 2 counts of transmitting a communication in interstate commerce containing a threat to kidnap or injure. So this is one of those instances, again, also, like, not only is that, but they're out of context social media posts that, it's not even actionable if it doesn't post some sort of recipe about how to prepare the rich for consumption, but like they tack on the interstate commerce because it's being done over the internet, despite the fact that this is about stopping a far-right incursion or attempted putsch against the government in the town that you live in. The fact that there are communications about how we need to resist violent actors coming in and causing violence upon ourselves and further reducing whatever quote-unquote democratic government there is in the world. That they're saying that it's now a federal charge because it's over the internet. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like I said, some pretty decent coverage. There was an article in Jacobin that came out in January.
I think the Jacobin article by Branko Marcetic is probably my favorite of the articles that have come out so far. I feel like, and so I encourage everyone, who's listening to read that one specifically. Because I feel like that really captures the absurdity of the case.
And I was kind of surprised too that there's also a pretty decent article coming from Reason, which is like a libertarian like
yeah, I saw that too.
Oh,
I was about to post that one up there the other day, but
wow, okay, I actually haven't seen that one yet.
Need to get that. I was kind of surprised about that too, to be honest.
It's making some pretty like cogent arguments like in a legalistic framework of the government attempting to suppress the right to bear arms based on the political speech of an individual. And it probably doesn't hurt that, again, he's a white dude, but
I'll definitely have to read on that one.
Really, it just comes down to like, it's easier for the prosecution to go after Dan Baker than it is for them to prosecute Donald Trump.
Yeah. So there's this and other coverage that's come up, and hopefully there will be more. But so the situation kind of reminds me of the case of Lauren Reed. He's a Dene man in Arizona facing 10 years in federal prison for joking comments in a private Facebook chat during the uprising. Does there seem to be like a trend in this sort of application of speech on social media platforms like Facebook being taken out of context and used to criminalize people on the left? And I don't know if there are any other cases that kind of remind you of this sort of thing, or if you have other thoughts on that.
I would say absolutely there is this pattern of, taking jokes, taking private messages. I think, in the case of Lauren Reed, they're really trying to slam this like arson charge, which from what I remember reading in the Al Jazeera article about it, it was born out of the civil rights movement as a way of, penalizing civil rights activists. And this federal charge is almost exclusively used to punish activists, civil rights activists. But I definitely see that there is this pattern. I can't think of any other cases right now.
They sort of have these laws ready at wait. They'll pass them, under pretense of preparing for, to protect against right-wing violence, and then once the public focus kind of dwindles down, then they'll use it against leftists as soon as they get an opportunity. There were some other examples listed in that Al Jazeera article. There was Evan Ellis. I think he was a BLM organizer in Evansville who got 2 years probation and psychiatric evaluation, and got 3 counts of felony intimidation for posting a little clip on Facebook of him making a gun gesture.
Oh wow!
He was talking about allegedly some officials or something like that. I don't know, some policies that he didn't like. There was Samuel Mara also. He was charged, allegedly for threatening a racist counter-protester. He could get up to 5 years. Those are felony arson laws that were invoked against Standing Rock protesters that Jack was referring to. There's also a recent case here in Tallahassee. I think it's kind of near Tallahassee. Do you know where Baker County is? I think it's somewhat close by to Tallahassee, but there's another local activist named Kevin Connor who was arrested recently also. They were trying to present it as if he was acting inappropriately with minors or something like that, but really he was just an organizer who was helping students. He was invited to speak to them about how they could organize in their schools and in their campuses.
I mean, and even just as far as a local, example is in Tallahassee, there were 19 people that were arrested for protesting on a sidewalk. And they tried to slam all of them with felony charges, or at least I know they tried to slam some of them with felony charges. One still has felony charges which haven't been dropped, but it's just we in Tallahassee, we had a man driving a truck through the crowd. No charges were pressed against him, because he said he feared for his life. And we had a guy who actually pulled out a gun and pointed it at people, actually pointed a gun at protesters. And he also had no charges because he said he feared for his life. So this was a counter-protester, just some white dude. But you just have, a group of a rainbow coalition of black and brown and white activists fighting for Black Lives Matter, protesting on a sidewalk, and then 19 of them get arrested. It's just the laws are not equally distributed at all. In Florida, there's this anti-protest bill, and they're saying that it's going to be DeSantis, the governor, introduced it during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and then reintroduced it. It got a lot of backlash, and then he reintroduced it after the events that unfolded at the Capitol on January 6th. And he's saying that it's to fight extremism, but, the way that some of the speakers at the most recent protests explained it is there are already laws against rioting. There's already laws against looting. And what these, anti-protest laws, these, felony charges do is make it more expensive and make the sentences longer for anybody who breaks those laws. And then they are unequally distributed and used primarily against left-wing activists, but most recently they're coming out of this idea that it's to stop right-wing extremists.
Recently, some courts have ruled that portions of the Federal Riot Act are unconstitutional. So, even, people who encourage or promote riots is legally free speech, apparently.
This is The Final Straw, and you're listening to our March 7th, 2021 interview with supporters of imprisoned anarchist and anti-fascist veteran Dan Baker, who is now serving 44 months in federal prison. More details in our show notes.
I didn't know about that. I'm looking forward to reading up on that after this. These are really, really good examples that you're bringing up that I don't know about, so I'm going to do a little research and link some articles.
It's also called the anti-protest bill, if you look up Florida anti-protest bill. But the thing is there are 26 states that have introduced bills like this since what happened on January 6th. And what's being introduced in Florida isn't even the worst one. There are some that are actually trying to make it so that it is a 30-year prison time felony charge for organizing a protest. And then the way that the DeSantis bill is defining a protest is a group of 9 or more people blocking traffic at an intersection, which would include every demonstration that the Black Lives Matter protest had. And it also tries to make it so that there is no option for bail for people who are arrested for these protest charges. It tries to make them felonies, which, in addition to stripping people of the right to vote, it also makes it so that they can't work state or federal jobs. The way that felony charges are used against people in Florida are just really disastrous. Many, many bills like this have sprung up in over half the country as a result of what happened on January 6th, but they're going to be disproportionately used against leftist activists versus the right-wing extremists that they're claimed to have started from. Oh, actually, Eric just pulled up a good infographic.
Oh yeah, also the bill protects anyone who does bodily harm to protesters. So they're already willing to make allowances to protect property, but if anyone tries to protect another person, that's terrorism. So that's kind of like, really, what he was doing is counterterrorism, but if they admit that, then they'll have to admit that Trump is a terrorist. And he appointed them. But also damaging a statue can be punishable for up to 15 years. And it also allows the state to override any municipality that wants to decrease police budgets.
Yeah, so the way that they have it is if a municipality votes to decrease their own police budget, it has to be approved by DeSantis in order to defund the police. Which, when you think about, there's this whole argument about states' rights and civil rights and local rights, or, and then suddenly it's like, no, just kidding, like, we have a dictatorship where we have one person that gets to decide this decision for everybody. And then if there is a protest and if damage happens, the state of Florida can sue the municipality for not adequately supplying their police officers. So, like, if anything is damaged, then they can say that the city needs to increase its police force. So it's a very, very, very problematic bill, and it's not even the worst one that's out there.
If January 20th had popped off the way that it was threatened to, for instance, and if this had passed, then, police standing by and letting right-wingers go and do whatever they were going to do could be a reason for the police to just get more funding. That doesn't seem, Yeah, and in a sense, really logical. The real coup is just them seizing control of, or, trying to ram through all these, like, this anti-protest legislation and, all these, like, sort of ramping up all these surveillance programs. It's not really a coup if they're already in control, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could find more specific about that last bit that I was saying. I'll have to look it up later. Maybe that's something I can message you about.
Well, there's also the federal level measures that are also being passed by Biden and Pelosi, as far as I know.
The Patriot Act 2.
Yeah, aren't we on number 3 by now? But yeah, it's all this. Yeah, definitely all the security state discussion and discourse is. It's at least a lot of people are recognizing it for what it is, that it's just using whatever political capital they were able to. I'm sure that some individuals and employees were quite frightened on the 6th when the windows were getting smashed and people were coming in and fighting the cops and everything, and that sucks for cleaners or employees or whoever was working up there. But like the fact that that January 6th has been framed as another September 11th, like, is just so ridiculous. Par for the course.
It doesn't address the fact that, the only reason they're able to get in there is because of all the, cops and military that were complicit. Mm-hmm. And politicians.
Yeah. As far as supporting Daniel, how can people find out more about the case? How can they support the work that the crew is doing? How can they support him personally?
I mean, at least so far, it seems like his attorneys are doing a good job. Like, they're really well known here in the community. I think they've also worked with other activists, so we kind of lucked out in that regard. We're kind of focusing right now on just letter writing as much as possible.
I also want to emphasize, as far as letter writing, is that the paper must be white in color, envelopes must be white in color, and they can only use blue or black ink. That is just something that it makes no sense because, like I said, they scan the letters anyway. But
there's a guide to the there's some screenshots of the guidelines on there as well, and some links to the website, with more information.
Well, Eric and Jack, thank you so much for this conversation. And yeah, get at me with some of those links, and I'll definitely include them in the show notes about related cases. That's a lot to think about, and I really appreciate the research that y'all are doing and the support work that you're doing for Daniel. Like, it's super important, even beyond him as your friend. As you said, like, these tools that are being turned on him are ones that are often turned on other people, and are in danger of being used against all of us.
He's so upset about his situation right now. Like, he said he's about to start a vow of silence, except for his allies. So I still have to find out if he's following through with that. But it's definitely gonna, it's really crucial that he gets letters, and that he just feels supported, and that people are like following his case and watching his case, so that he knows that he can't. At least that he'll be less likely to like suffer some kind of abuse or something while he's in there. Or at least they can be held to account for like already what he's been experiencing in there.
Yeah, and to like reiterate, as has been said a lot of times on this show and in other discussions around supporting prisoners, sending letters to a prisoner is not just a kind act or a way of making a friend, but it literally is a measure in prisons of how much support or how many people are paying attention on the outside. And it literally means that not only Daniel, but the people that are around Daniel, for guards or administration to fuck with them, they have to know at that point, like, okay, well, all these people who are on the outside are going to have concern about this. Is it worth me messing with this guy or the people around him if this many people are going to make a ruckus on the outside?
And I think that's kind of what I'm really trying to focus on right now, is just creating some situation for him to be able to re-enter, potentially even maybe in a better situation than he started in. Just now that people have a better idea of like who he is and what he stands for. I hope that more people in the community will come together, and I'm trying to get him set up maybe with some kind of platform to continue his his yoga and jiu-jitsu like training and groups, and I'm hoping like he can kind of hit the ground running when he gets out, and I can hopefully leverage this network to create some opportunities for him as well.
Well, thank you both. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanna mention or that you wanna?
Yeah, I mean, basically, like it really is like it's coming to that place. I mean, this is serious. It's class war against all of us. Like, we're all like potentially at risk here. So I feel like it's really important for everyone to show solidarity in their different communities, to connect where they can, and then to, unify whatever, groups they're able to get together, because that's the only way that anyone will be able to protect themselves or each other.
So, as many regular listeners to the show know, we've been doing the show for over 10 years now, and have recently spearheaded, I guess, a transcription project whose main aim is to get transcripts of The Final Straw into prison and in front of the eyes of folks that want translation or want to read along for whatever reason. And we have been crowdfunding those efforts, and many of y'all have very generously joined in. But know that everybody who donates for however amount, it'll go toward paying comrades to transcribe the audio. There are many ways to do that. You can go to our blog, thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org/donate, and there's lots of ways you can do that: Venmo, PayPal, Patreon, or LibraPay. There's also cool shirts you can get, cool buttons, stickers. So thank you to everyone who's done that. And if you are interested in doing that, and if you have the money to spare, that's great. If you don't, the show will never go behind a paywall. That's not something that we want to do ever.
This is The Final Straw. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.
And leaving this country I've always called home. I'm going out to fight for freedom with people who just wanna get along. And I just cannot stand to be trodden. This hypocrisy cuts me to the bone. And I will not return till the people have a safe and peaceful place to call their own. And the whole world turns and sees the sunrise over Rojava. I know the history of the conflict, I'm not misinformed. I go to Werbel, sign my name and buy my uniform. Across the Tigris in the dark of night I sail away, and in the morning meet my comrades for a brighter day. And that's the first time my eyes see the sunrise over Rojava. Because it's right and I don't care what anybody thinks of me. Some are saying that it's not my vibe, but we're all human beings as far as I can see. And I do not believe in your borders, it's the divisions that create atrocities. So I'm gonna help build a system out of feminism and ecology. Wait for the night to end and see the sunrise over Rojava. The sun